Hello and welcome to the Doofcast, the official variety podcast of doofmedia.com. Ladies and gentlemen, your attention please. Welcome to the newest, the greatest, the most spectacular show in entertainment history. Put your hands together for the fabulous Doofbles Variety Hour. My name is Scott Daly, and I am your host for this evening. And of course, the star of the show, the incomparable, the wonderful Matt Freeman.
Hey, everybody. It's great to be back.
You're supposed to do a song.
Oh, no, I was doing the other part.
The what?
Oh, so, Scott, what are we doing here this week?
This week on the show, it is time for another one of our patron-produced episodes. We've been at a good clip with these things, Matt. I'm proud of us. Every other week, we're keeping our obligations. I'm so proud of us. Anyway, for those of you that don't know, folks that pledge to us on the quote-unquote Doof Warrior level on Patreon, that's our Patreon account, which is patreon.com/doofmedia. One of their rewards for supporting us at that level is to get to select a topic for us to do a show on. This week, our patron Connor asked us to look at the 1989 cult classic puppet debauchery known as Meet the Feebles. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking all about Peter Jackson's Meet the Feebles.
I think that might be a good place to start.
Well, let's hold on here. Okay. Before we get right into it, there's a couple other things we want to do on this show. We might cut these segments. If we do, I'll just cut this part of the show because it's the magic of editing. But one of the other things after we finish talking about Meet the Feebles, we wanted to do like a quick roundup of some podcasts we've been listening to, and then I wanted to spend some time talking to you about the Marblelympics, which is, I don't think, a thing you've ever watched, but you need to, and I'm going to explain why.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to your explanation here because I see everyone talking about this all the time in the Discord, and I start to wonder if some kind of brain parasite has been making the rounds.
No, it's impossible.
Okay.
Tune in to the end of the show to find out why the brain parasite says to watch Marblelympics.
Mm-hmm.
But let's get into our main event. Let's jump right into it and talk about Meet the Feebles.
You want to join the Feebles?
Oh, rather. Meet the Feebles! Meet the Feebles!
Meet the Feebles. A movie that began as family entertainment, but went horribly wrong.
Have you got any smack? Smack?
Matt, so, you know, let's say, first of all, this is a full spoilers discussion of this movie. Not that, I don't know, like, first of all, the movie came out in 1989. Second of all, I don't know if this is a movie that, like, if you get mad at someone for spoiling Meet the Feebles, we need to have a conversation. So,
yeah.
But all that being said, we are going to really dive into this movie and talk about everything that happens in it. But in order to do that, we have to explain first what Meet the Feebles is. So you want to take a shot at that?
Sure. First, I'll mention that you can just watch it on YouTube. Like, it's not hard to find.
Yeah.
Meet the Feebles is it's a kind of seedy, like, backstage noir type film. Maybe noir isn't the right word, but everything in the movie is either puppets or people in suits playing different animals. So it's this extremely seedy, rather disgusting, actually, plot line, but everyone is cute puppets. And
yeah,
for sure they play that for humor. Yeah.
It's basically the Muppet Show. Backstage on the day of production for the Muppet Show, only the Muppets have a lot of sex with each other and eat shit and film pornography and do drugs and kill each other and eat shit. Like, there's literally a scene where one of the characters is eating poop.
Yeah.
So this movie. This is something we said cult classic, and we mean it. This is something of a film that is adored amongst kind of the cult, weird, pushing the envelope cinema fans out there. The people really, really love this movie. Had you ever seen this movie before we sat down to watch it for this show?
No, and I hadn't heard of it, and I don't really know much about even the scene that it's in. So I think part of getting ready to talk about it was just doing a bit of reading on why someone would make a movie like this in the first place. Because it's not. I think you and I agreed it's got its moments. Like it's entertaining, but like Peter Jackson is not attempting to make a widely beloved like classically good movie.
No.
There's definitely functional filmmaking and functional storytelling here, but the story is very upsetting and off-putting, and basically only going to appeal to the kind of people who are literally just there for something to gross them out and shock them and be weird and surprising.
Hey, that's me.
I will admit that I enjoyed the movie more than I kind of expected to, based on the first minute. I was like, what have I gotten myself into here?
Yeah.
And then once you kind of get past the conceit, it's pretty enjoyable. And then the last like 5 minutes kind of just take it to a whole new level of ridiculousness where you're like, okay.
Yeah, the movie ends with like a mass shooting, which I mean, maybe in 1989 was a lot funnier than it is in 2019.
Yeah, it definitely didn't age well.
Yeah. But I mean, that's what this movie is doing though. Like I think maybe that scene almost works better in 2019 because it's even more offensive, because what this movie is trying to do is trying to push buttons, is trying to do the most disgusting thing, the most out there thing, the most offensive thing, but cage it in adorable puppets.
Right.
Like the Bugs Bunny stand-in of this movie has AIDS throughout most of the movie. They never actually call it AIDS; they just call it the big one.
The big one, yeah.
Which I don't know why that. I mean, maybe because like we were right in the middle of the AIDS crisis, and they felt it would be too bad taste to like drop the actual. I mean, they're making fun of AIDS to a certain extent, so it's offensive no matter what. But maybe they just felt there was a bridge too far to actually say it. I don't know.
Or I don't know. I mean, maybe it just would have taken the wind out of the joke if you said it by its true name. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, but like several times during the movie, I'm pretty sure I said out loud, like, "Oh my God, Jesus, are we going here?" Okay.
And the answer, that's the thing about this movie, is the answer to that question is always yes. Anytime you're like, are we really going to go there? The answer is yes. That is what this movie is doing. And I kind of want to use this. This is something we never really talked about on the show before, because you and I really don't watch these types of movies very often. But this is a it's not a genre of cinema, but it is a style of cinema. These weird, cheaply made, it's not, I guess it is an exploitative, like black comedy type of film, that is just like what it is doing is trying to push buttons and make you laugh and maybe make you kind of feel bad for laughing at the same time. Like anytime I laughed, I was kind of like, oh, Jesus.
Yeah. I felt like the defining moment of the story, which takes place toward the end, so this is just full spoiler comment, is when the Bugs Bunny has like thought that he's had AIDS the whole movie. He's getting ready for like, he's basically preparing to die. He's falling apart, and then the doctor calls and tells him that the test was wrong. It's actually just some harmless illness, and he runs outside, and he's like, "I'm gonna make it," and then he's immediately blown away by, he's like the second victim of the hippo as she goes on the mass shooting, and I like involuntarily like splutter laughed at it, and like instantly felt terrible about and was like this is such terrible dark humor, and I love it.
Yeah.
I mean, talking about humor in general is not something we've really focused on a ton, I think.
It's so hard to talk about, right? Because like it's so hard to I can sit here and I can be like, this writing is good, this writing is bad. But when you get to humor, it's like some of the stuff is hilarious to me.
Yeah.
And I don't know why I can explain it's hilarious to me. I think it's because there's a deep corner of my brain that is just like, like in love with this kind of offensive, dark humor.
Yeah.
That just cracks up at like a sex scene with a cow where it's like it's just in the most ridiculous thing where her udders are everywhere and it's just like so outlandish and absurd and like I'm just like there's a deep part of my id that is just like yeah
Right. I mean basically a lot of humor is just transgressing social boundaries, and I think the fundamental rule of humor is just to be surprising.
Right.
And when you are surprising in the direction of, oh gasp, you can't say that or show that, or in the direction of, oh that's horrible and surprising, like I'm surprised they went there, then that creates the effect of dark humor, I think. And
right.
and yeah, and I really like it too. It's interesting how like comedy is this weird space, right, where you can basically say things that would get you in trouble in any normal context. And in fact, comedians these days, and I think for the last many decades, have gotten in trouble for crossing lines that certain groups felt that they shouldn't cross. And it's funny because nobody's off limits, right? Like you can get in trouble with every corner of the political spectrum for joking in a certain way. And from the comedian's perspective, they're like, oh, like that's the part of the hazard of doing business. And something like this is almost like it's guaranteed not to be some people's thing, right? Like
right, yeah.
I don't even know if it's my thing. Like I'm not gonna go out of my way to watch like Peter Jackson's other, his first film, Bad Taste, which is apparently also like a so-called splatter comedy. With a lot of the same type of like violence and crassness. I'm like, I don't feel compelled to go check that out. I don't not enjoy it certainly. But it's crazy. This is a crazy movie, everybody. This is crazy.
It really is. And I think speaking about comedy and speaking about offensive comedy, like part of me thinks that, and I haven't seen this on the internet, but like looking at this movie through that 2019 lens is not going to do it any favors. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if like the reason why this movie has gotten a pass at this point is because of the puppets. And maybe that's why when Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh and whoever else they made this movie with were coming up with the idea, why they were like, hey, we could get away with a lot more.
Right.
If these are just silly looking puppet people.
Well,
I mean, fat shaming is bad. Fat shaming a literal hippo is different, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like that, like I for some reason in your head, even though it's clearly like you can clearly pick that up and transfer it to real life human beings who suffer with these kind of things. It's a person in a hippo costume with like exaggerated, absurd features, and maybe you can like you're able to like look away at the bad parts of it because you can just be like, fat hippo with giant boobs who's eating 40 cakes. Like, that's funny.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of the cleverness, like a lot of what you're laughing at is actually the cleverness of kind of the riff on the genre or the trope or whatever that the movie is actually doing. Like you can imagine this movie with humans and it just becomes a very dour and unpleasant, seedy movie where you just kind of feel like shit afterwards. Whereas you do it with puppets, and like you said, like a filming like a porn set that's just uncomfortable. Filming a porn set where the star is a cow with giant udders hanging out is immediately hilarious because you're laughing at the at the twist of it. So like and a lot of the comedy of the movie does indeed come from the fact that it's puppets, right? Like when the boss of the troupe goes to like have a battle with the guy who sold him bad heroin or whatever, it's purely funny because it's like really dumb looking puppets having
they're crab
fight.
People. They're fighting crab people.
Yeah, they're fighting crab people. Yeah.
And I mean, the thing that like the thing that I think that makes it better, that like I think it's clever. Like I
Yeah.
think it's a clever movie. It's not just how can we gross you out. It is definitely that, but it is how can we gross you out in clever ways. Like the fly is one of the most fascinating characters in the movie to me, because the fly serves as basically the buzzing, annoying nature of news reporters and how they're always buzzing around looking for a story, and so they've made that manifest with this fly. But he is also a fly, which means he sits in your toilet and eats your shit. And so like, but they have this character kind of continue throughout the course of the movie, and he's like always there on the wall, like listening to the story. He's the one that breaks the story about the rabbit having the big one. And the end of the movie is pays off on his love of shit by tricking him into the room by telling him someone like clogged the toilet with poop, and the fly's like, oh yeah, and flies in there and gets immediately and brutally killed.
Right.
His wings ripped off, and a great a great joke about balanced journalism that I actually thought was very clever when they ripped one wing off.
Yes.
And they said, "Oh, looks like he's definitely a left-wing journalist."
Right.
That's hilarious.
And then they rip the other wing off so that it'd be balanced. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No. The script is actually very clever. You're right.
Yeah.
That's the thing is like, while you're watching it, you're like, am I allowed to be enjoying this? Like, because this is so bad. Like, it's so
Right.
bad on
It's-
any like normal level.
Right. Yeah. And you know, that's one of the big comparisons I wanted to make, because a movie that is very easy to compare this to because it was going for it is a movie that came out last year called The Happy Time Murders, and it is basically a puppet gross out comedy. Noir style. So it's basically a noir, except the detective is a puppet. And they do a lot of the same, like it's clearly aping Meet the Feebles. Like there is a sex scene with a cow where her udders are spraying milk everywhere. Like it is very clearly calling back to that movie, but it's way worse. Like and I mean, like, it's not as good. I don't mean like worse as in disgusting. I think it's equally disgusting as Meet the Feebles, but it is less clever. Instead of going there with the joke, they just and building something clever around the disgusting nature, they just kind of do it. Like they just do it. Like in Meet the Feebles, the porn sequence is like part of the ongoing plot of the story, and it's connected around two of our characters who are like these two chorus members that fall in love over the course of a day. They fall in love, and then like there's all this seedy horribleness circling around them, and one of those things is the porn shoot. In Happy Time Murders, they just do it. He just goes into a place and they just do it, and it's just gross. And it's a little funny, but I mean, I think the reason why this is widely known and celebrated and that movie tanked was because of that cleverness.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, we should be clear. This movie definitely tanked too, but it's become a cult favorite, and a big part of that is because it was Peter Jackson, and people came back and revisited it after he went on to make some bigger and better things.
Yeah. But this was a cheap movie too. This
Yeah.
movie was made for $750,000, which sounds like a lot until you remember it's a puppet movie, and puppets are like freaking pain in the ass.
Yeah,
It's hard to do, and this was like a small group of people that got barely any financing. I think there's really only like 4 or 5 actors in the movie, and they do like 4 voices each, which you can kind of tell if you spend any time listening close to them. But I think it's pretty remarkable, and I think you can kind of see there are moments in this story where you can see Peter Jackson's inherent skill behind the camera.
Yeah, well, there's particular types of shots that he likes to do, and things that he likes to do with the camera that he does in this movie, that he definitely does in Lord of the Rings and pretty much everything. Like it's really one thing that's really like genuinely good is the way everything feels so seedy and terrible. Like from the first shot of the movie, everything is just so gross. Like when you're inside, you know, the backstage hallways of the theater, everything is just broken down and dirty and dark, and the angles that he chooses to shoot are partly, you know, obviously to like hide the person holding the puppet, but also also just like well chosen to kind of highlight the claustrophobic and unpleasant nature of everything. And it's definitely shot in a way where you can tell that he put thought into it, and there's intentionality behind all the shots, like.
Yeah.
Like he wasn't real. That's what's really interesting about it, is like you can see his talent, and you can see that he's not half-assing it. That's kind of what's crazy. Like the script is not half-assed. The cinematography and the directorial choices, and like nothing about it is actually bad. It's just like, why would you put all your skill together to make something like this?
Yeah, I mean, and there's something about that I just inherently celebrate, right? Because like this is a group of people that got together and said, wouldn't it be funny if? And then they did it.
Yeah.
And it was hard, and they spent time like this is not like a Tuesday night like hanging out like joking back and forth about things, and then we just like roll up Wednesday morning and just do it and be like, that was funny, that was weird, like that's some bullshit we just threw together and it was ridiculous. Like, yeah, they spent time on this. They said this would be ridiculous, let's do the work to pay off on the ridiculousness of it.
Right. Yeah. They spent and $750,000. Like it's a real movie. And
right.
to clarify what I just said, I'm not saying like, why did they do this as in like, I think they shouldn't have done it. What I mean by that is I don't personally understand the mental process that goes into that, but
like how like I think I know what you mean. Like it's funny today, it's funny tomorrow. Is this going to be funny and entertaining to me, the creator, 4 months from now when we're $200,000 over budget, we're exhausted.
Yeah.
For like we got the fly eating the poop just doesn't look. It's just not working. How do we figure this out? Like when you're actually in the thing doing it, and you're in the trenches doing the work on something that is so insane and absurd and like it's nothing. It is a nothing movie, but it is the point of it is that it's a nothing movie.
It's the kind of thing where like you try to explain it to somebody like in just a casual conversation. Oh, what are you working on? Oh, I'm working on a movie. Oh, what's the movie about? Like,
well, there's this hippo, and
yeah,
her walrus boyfriend is cheating on her with a cat.
Yeah,
and she's got a eating issue, and then at the end of the movie, she shoots everyone.
Yeah, she and it's
a comedy.
It's really funny. Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is like this in my head. I had heard of this movie before. In my head, this was the raunchy puppet movie. That's what I knew it as, and it is that. That is actually an accurate description of it. But it's a 90-minute movie, and like I didn't find that the joke got stale over the course of those 90 minutes, which you think it would. Like you would think that this would like this couldn't carry a full feature length film, because it's like their puppets doing gross stuff is like a skit to me.
Yeah.
But I do think that they pulled it off, and part of that I actually think is the characters here. Like they draw actual characters.
Yeah. So one thing that I knew and I'd forgotten until I kind of reminded myself is that it was intended as a short film, and then it was expanded into a full length film from there. So I think it's to revisit what I just said. Like I guess they didn't actually just say like, yeah, what would be awesome, a full length movie about gross puppets. I think they had a more modest and kind of realistic scope for it, and then when they got the funding to make a full-length movie, they said, well, okay, we're going to do a good job on this because I think they're people of integrity and creativity, and so they did that, right? They took their idea that it expanded beyond what they had intended it to be, and they did the best they could, and it ended up being this crazy thing that it turned into.
Yeah.
Yeah, apparently the enthusiasm of Japanese investors drove Meet the Feebles to become a
That's kind of
film.
crazy, right?
Yeah.
Like I think that there is a part of me that is just inherently fascinated by people who have an idea and they go out there and they make the idea happen, and then more people come on board because they like your idea, and it's just like the act of creation here. And even if the thing you're creating is ridiculous. Like they made something. They went out there and they made something crazy.
Yeah. I mean, you almost have to wonder if and this is a hilarious thought to me, the fact that Peter Jackson had personal experience working with like puppets and having to do these elaborate like composite shots where there's like a giant hippo in a suit talking to like a tiny little puppet the size of your hand and make that scene look right and make it work.
Yeah.
If that experience didn't directly feed into like hobbits talking to Treebeard shots later in his career.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And I mean, one of the things I think that is hardest with working with puppets is timing, because the puppets move slower than people, right? And so I think, especially with comedic timing is everything. And you have to like shoot the scene like where the puppet moves or moves its mouth or talks or does something, and the joke lands because of that. And I think, having to work around those problems, those kind of special effects problems, certainly could be seen as skills that were employed later.
Yeah. Right.
I think this is a good way to kind of transition to talk about Mr. Peter Jackson generally, because he is this fascinating filmmaker, I think. And part of me, and it means we'll have to revisit this movie, but part of me like wants to do like, oh, let's do a deconstructing on Peter Jackson, right? Because his career is really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, that was almost the thing that I wanted most to think about and to talk about in context of this movie is like, I think one of the first things I said after watching it, or at least was thinking, was like, this movie's really inspiring because it communicates that you can go from something like this to making the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So really, everyone has a shot at greatness, which is mostly a joke because this movie's obviously well made. So like the joke is that you can go from something that's absurd and ridiculous to making something serious, I guess. But yeah, he's made several, amazing movies. I think I've only really seen Lord of the Rings movies and The Frighteners. I've always heard good things about Heavenly Creatures and would like to watch that. And the King Kong movie is kind of, I guess, I don't know. What did you think of that?
I liked it. I liked the King Kong movie. I mean, like, it's fascinating to look at that career, right? I mean, he did Bad Taste. He did Meet the Feebles, where were these gross out comedies. Then he really dove into kind of gross out horror for a little bit. And then kind of campy horror, like campy kind of gross out stuff. I mean, The Frighteners is a silly freaking movie, Matt. Like, it's really ridiculous. Like, I love The Frighteners. I actually really like that movie. I think it's really underrated, but it's weird.
Yeah.
It's not your typical Hollywood like horror film.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the jokes in that, I think I saw the movie when I was pretty young, actually, and a lot of the jokes are very uncomfortable, mean-spirited, dark. And I think I definitely, yeah, I've always thought this is a great movie, actually, but it's definitely on that streak of his, I mean, I think he just personally has a really dark sense of humor.
Yeah, he does. And I mean, then he makes Lord of the Rings, and I've never really dove into the story of how it ended up Fran Walsh, Philippa Boyens, and Peter Jackson, right? Like how that happened. It just seems crazy to me.
Yeah. With the amount of like for that project too, right? Like,
yeah,
it was back when Lord of the Rings was coming out. Like, I was already a huge Lord of the Rings fan of the books, and I was like stunned and amazed because there was no precedent for something like that, for making a 3-movie giant, extremely expensive series, basically sight unseen, right? Like they filmed them all at the same time, and that means that they were filming them before they knew if the first one was going to be successful. That's crazy.
Yep. It is. Yeah. I mean, nowadays that seems normal, but yeah, I mean, back in 2001, is that when that movie came out? I don't even know.
That feels right.
Yeah, it was 2001. I nailed it. Back in 2001, you didn't do that. I mean, Lord of the Rings did it, and then Harry Potter kind of started doing it, and now it's like the normal thing. But yeah, I mean, the amount of trust that a studio would place into a director and and writing team. I mean, Fran Walsh wrote that movie as well. Like they're married, Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh, and they've been co-writers on just about everything he's done. And it's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like you can see like hints of that humor in Lord of the Rings, like when you look for it, like in some of the way that the orcs behave with they're just like constantly shanking each other. Some of the things Gollum says.
Yeah, I think a lot of Gollum I see early Peter Jackson in. I think some of the scarier parts of Lord of the Rings, I think of the Shelob scene, I think comes from his work in horror. It's really remarkable, like to see how a director comes together. I mean, that's why we started that whole Deconstructing Director series, right? We wanted to see what makes a director, what makes them the type of filmmaker they are. And you know, watching this movie and thinking about The Frighteners makes me go back to Lord of the Rings and think of all those moments. And I think that's great.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that is. The more we talk about this, the more you make me want to do a Deconstructing Peter Jackson, which is.
I think it might be harder because we'd have to track down some of these movies. Like
Bad Taste.
Where's Bad Taste? Can you see Bad Taste?
Probably.
Apparently, it's on Prime. Yes, you can. There you go. Boom.
Of course, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so. Do we have anything else? This is a weird movie to talk about. It is a challenge for us because it's like a different kind of conversation. Because I'm not really interested in like analyzing the story of Heidi's relationship with her boyfriend. I'm not really interested in analyzing the story of the heroin addict Vietnam vet who kills himself with a knife at the end of the story.
And is basically just Deer Hunter.
Yeah, I mean, they did a Deer Hunter reference in a puppet movie.
To call it a reference is a bit generous. They just redid the whole Deer Hunter scene.
They just did,
with puppets.
You're right.
It's utterly like that. During that part, I was like, Are you even allowed to do this? Like, this isn't even like a parody. This is just the whole scene with puppets.
They're even wearing the bandana or the headbands.
Yeah.
Still, I mean, it is literally Deer Hunter except for frog puppets.
I mean, I guess one thing to say about like there's something. I don't know what the word is for this exact way of doing storytelling or filmmaking where there's, I don't know, like 20 characters or something in that range. And you kind of get to know all of them and they get their own little story. And almost all of them are horribly murdered at the end. And you actually kind of hate all of them and don't care. Like which is another funny thing is like normally something that I'm sure I've said 1,000 times is like, well, you want to make your characters like likable and you want to have a empathic connection.
Yeah.
I pretty much hated all the characters in this movie and was happy to see them die. That's a different way of doing storytelling, isn't it?
It sure is. Yeah. I would call it like an anthology, probably. Yeah. Although that's not strictly true because there are stories that go throughout the entire thing, but you're right. They get their own little off story.
Yeah. But yeah, like it's cool because like who's the main character? Like you could kind of say the little dog who comes in or the little whatever it is creature that comes in the beginning, the hedgehog. Yeah.
Robert.
But he doesn't really get all that much screen time. Like not that much more than the other characters. Like
he gets to be happy at the end.
Yeah, he's one of the few that gets to live. I'd say the walrus boss probably gets if not most of the screen time. I mean. A pretty big chunk. But yeah, I guess I'm just pointing out like most storytelling is basically following like a protagonist and some side characters, and this was very much all over the place, but it worked. It actually worked really well, and I'm not just saying like for a crazy ass puppet movie. Like I actually thought like, oh yeah, this accomplished what it was trying to accomplish storytelling wise.
Yeah, I mean, so let's look at the characters that live, right? Because I think that I might be saying something. Maybe. Because Robert and what was her name? The girl that he loves. They live.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. They live.
Sid
the elephant lives with his baby that he's finally taken. he takes responsibility for the kid even after his ex's head gets blown off. She's running around headless like a chicken with her head cut off. And then it's just like that moment I think was actually hilarious for me because her head has been blown off. Her head is sitting there. She's obviously dead. She's a dead chicken. And then he sees his baby is in danger, and he says, "My child," right? And the camera cuts to the decapitated head and does like a rack zoom on it, as if like the chicken was just like, "Oh, now you take credit," but the chicken's definitely dead.
I know, it's genius, and I think you're right that like I think the movie is kind of being a bit moral there at the end, a bit moralizing because you know he gets to live because he takes responsibility for his son. Or child, or I don't know if it's a boy or girl. The two lover, you know, what is it? Robo and Lucille get to live because they're relatively innocent.
Well, and I think the reason why Robert gets to live is because he apologizes to her. So we didn't talk about this, but he catches her basically being raped. Not a great looking movie. She's basically being sexually assaulted by the terrible rat character, who's probably the most evil character in the whole movie. He assumes that she's like cheating on him, and then judges her for being a whore and a lush, right? And so he's judging her on these things, which is a shitty thing to do. But before he even learns that that's not the way it went down, he says, "I don't care. Like I don't like I respect you. I love you. Like I'm not going to judge you for these things." And I think the movie rewards him by getting to live.
What's it?
The director.
The director guy
lives.
gets. So it's kind of funny because he lives and then he like cashes in on the massacre with a tell-all book.
Does.
Which is funny because the movie is not just saying like the good people get to live. Like he kind of sucked too.
Yeah, I mean, he did get to give his performance about sodomy, which I don't like. Was that homophobia? I don't like. I didn't know how to read that, right? Because like on the one hand, it's funny that he's singing a song about how great sodomy is on a family comedy. Like imagine Kermit the Frog singing about sodomy. Like that's basically like that's inherently hilarious. But like I didn't know what to think about like what the movie itself was saying about that. Like should I feel okay with laughing at that, or is that just blatant homophobia?
I mean, I think it's fine because I think the joke is on the fact that it's a Muppet singing about sodomy in a family children's program. Like that's like it would be the same joke if it were just a raunchy song about sex, but it crosses the line just a bit further, especially in 1989 when that would have been beyond the pale.
Yeah. I mean, they did, and the guy that calls him a quote unquote fudge packer, which is a very terrible slur. Is the bad guy in the movie. Like we're not supposed to be like, oh, that's a funny thing to call him, right?
Right.
Plus the lines of the song are really funny.
Yeah.
We're not a Pentecostal and everybody's got an arsehole.
Yeah.
It's like that's really funny.
Yeah, it's hilarious. Like that's, I think that's one of the interesting things is the bad guys are so horrible, and they say a lot of horrible things, and they behave in horrible ways, and it's really obvious that the movie is not condoning that at all. Like at no point are you like, oh, I'm upset that the walrus. It's like, yeah, he's the bad guy, and he gets
he gets punished.
Yeah.
Like he very clearly the movie has him die in a horrible way because it is making a point about that. Yeah.
And then of course, like the coup de grace of the joke is that finally the hippo who committed the massacre not only lives but spends a breezy 10 years in prison and then is out being a cashier at a supermarket.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, that was the one where I'm like, okay, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, is the movie saying that it was justice that she killed everybody?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, because they're like, I mean, for the most part, they're all bad people, but there were also like a lot of just chorus people and extras that like did nothing, that were just in the background that got horribly murdered.
Right. I mean, that's the thing is like it's dark, right? Like it's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
You wouldn't say it was dark if only like the really bad people got killed, right? It's dark in the way where it's just like everything is bad and unjust and horrible. And
yeah, I think that's why you wanted to pull out noir there, because it feels like this is the world is kind of shitty.
Yeah.
Type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Did you have anything else you wanted to say? What was your favorite joke or scene or moment, I guess, is a good question to ask.
I mean, I definitely got like the weirdest laugh was the one I already mentioned, where the rabbit pops out and is immediately blown away, and like it's the timing of it is perfect. Like, speaking of the timing, like you were saying earlier,
Yeah.
like he comes out, he's so happy, it gives you like 1 second of him like bouncing up and down happily, and then you don't see the hippo, you just see his body get shredded, and you hear the sound, and then it cuts to the hippo, and that's just genius comic timing.
So here's something interesting about that. I read in the trivia on IMDb that was an M60, that machine gun they were using,
Right.
and they couldn't find blank rounds for it, so they were firing live ammunition. And I don't know if that is true for every single scene, right? But at some point during this movie, they were firing a real gun with real bullets.
Which isn't that like a extremely high power, high caliber, armor piercing type, like heavy? That's a heavy machine gun. So, wow. I want to hear more about that.
7.62 caliber.
Yeah.
Like it's insane. I don't even know how they got a hold of that gun. Like, what was New Zealand in 1989 just like, yeah.
Oh, you're making a film? Sure.
I'm sorry, we don't have any blank rounds though. Here's some live ammunition.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
Jesus. Yeah. That's an insane cartridge. That is, yeah. I'm looking up the cartridge.
Well,
size, and that's-
and that was one thing I was actually noticing about, like, I can't help but notice that, like, she fires like 100,000 rounds of ammo, but like the chain that's coming out of the gun never changes, and she never has to reload it.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I wasn't actually. I was just like, whatever. This is a puppet movie. It's fine.
Yeah. I mean, she's got it across her chest like a bandolier at one point. So,
Yeah.
you know what? I'm kind of like, talk about attention to detail in this movie. The hippo, they built 2 different hippo costumes, because in the flashback scene, she's thinner.
Yeah.
And so, like, you didn't have to do that, and it was probably not like a completely new costume. They probably just like attached like Velcroed other padding to it or something. But like that's time that a lot of filmmakers would just be like, I mean, does that matter really? Does it? Does that matter? Nah, it doesn't matter. No one's gonna care about that. But they did it.
Yeah. No, I agree. Like, I don't know. Like, it bothers to set up and characterize a lot of these background characters. Like, gives them a full backstory. You know.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah. And of course, it's New Zealand, right? This came out in New Zealand, so this is I think New Zealand humor is very unique, because I uniquely like it, because I think What We Do in the Shadows, the Taika Waititi film. I don't know if you've ever seen that. If not, see that.
Yeah, I haven't.
It's a vampire mockumentary that is just absolutely hilarious. Flight of the Conchords is another New Zealand comedy that went like kind of mainstream around the world. I just like this kind of like awkward but crass type of humor is like my jam. Maybe I need to just move to New Zealand.
Yeah, I agree that a disproportionate amount of my favorite funny people are from New Zealand. I went and I read about New Zealand humor after watching this movie.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, but
what did you learn about New Zealand humor?
well, frankly, it wasn't very informative. It was kind of stuff that I already knew. Like they like to make fun of Australians, and Australians like to make fun of them, and there's a lot of like ribbing back and forth there, which is kind of true between all the Anglophone countries, actually.
Yeah.
And then I don't know, like it honestly, it wasn't very enlightening. Like, I feel like it didn't tell me anything. I feel like there's a lot more to New Zealand humor than just like, oh, the way they talk is different from the way Australians talk. It's like, no, like there seems to be a particular, you talk about British humor. It's a very particular thing, right? I feel like from what I've seen, different New Zealanders have a similar kind of sense of the absurd that you see, like you mentioned, Flight of the Conchords. That's a very like absurdist group. This movie is very absurd. A lot of the jokes are like juxtapositions of visual images that you don't expect to see.
Yeah.
That's, I don't know. Maybe I'm overgeneralizing from small sample size, but
yeah, I mean probably, but who cares?
Yeah.
Like, that's
right.
we're going to generalize based on our sample and draw trends. That's what we do.
Yeah.
But no, I agree with you, and I like that. I would like to. We should do an episode on Flight of the Conchords one day.
Yeah.
Because I really love that it brings New Zealand humor and musical humor together, which are like some of my favorite things.
Yeah, me
So.
too. Yeah, there's a kind of like dryness to it, right? Like you never see, Taika Waititi or whatever, like cracking up at his own joke, like he's, or like hamming it up, right? He's
right. Yeah. All right, so that is Meet the Feebles. If you've made it this far and haven't seen the movie, you should check it out. No judgment if you bow out because it's just not your thing. I think this is one of those movies where I'm very comfortable saying it is not going to be everyone's thing, and you can bow out. But the good thing is there's really no barrier to investment or to watch or entry rather, because it's just on YouTube.
Yeah.
Meet the Feebles.
Check it out.
YouTube. Peter
Or
Jackson. All right, Matt. Like I said at the beginning of the show, this next segment is something that we've done, I think, a couple times over the long history of this podcast that has changed names like 3 times. Sometimes we just like get together and talk about what podcasts we've been listening to, because unsurprisingly, people that make podcasts usually like podcasts, and I listen to quite a few of them. You probably do too. Not probably. I know you do too.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I kind of have like this ever-changing list of podcasts I'm listening to. Some roll in, some roll out, some finish because they're temporary things and they finish, and I roll them out of the rotation and bring them back in. So I just thought it'd be fun to just take some time to talk about some of the podcasts we're currently listening to.
Sure. I think you definitely have a few new ones that you haven't checked out.
Yeah.
Or that you haven't told me about, rather. So I'd like to hear.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear about that, and I think I have a couple that that I haven't mentioned on the show at the very least. So yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah. So the first one I wanted to talk to you about is one called. I think I've mentioned this in the Discord before, and I might have mentioned it somewhere else in another show. Like, I get so confused. We have too many shows. I don't know where and when I've said things anymore, but it's a podcast called Harry Potter and the Sacred Text. The basic concept of this is very fascinating. It's looking at Harry Potter in a different kind of analytical lens, because it is basically saying, okay, let's pretend that Harry Potter is like the Bible or like the Quran, and look at it and try to glean meaning from this book as if it was just as sacred as those other books. And that doesn't mean it's like a religious podcast. I don't really think it is. The people that do it do have backgrounds in religious studies, and I think I don't think they're Christian. I don't know. But the point is, the idea is like, let's just study the text from the perspective of what lessons can we glean from this? What things are they telling us? Is this book telling us about how we should live our life, how we should be better people, how we should be kinder to the people around us? And so it's looking at the books from that kind of angle. And I've only listened to the episodes on the first book, the very first Harry Potter book, but I'm kind of in love with this show because I think there's just something inherently fascinating about looking at a book from this angle, because I think, first of all, like, the idea that a text is sacred and like should be valued is a concept that I inherently love, because that's kind of the way I try to approach all the books I read. Like, I think that goes into what we've talked about on our We've Got Worm show before, the idea that like assume the book is a work of genius, assume the author is a genius, and like make that your starting line, and approach everything you read that way, and I think you'll enjoy it more. And that's kind of I think the underlying theory behind this podcast as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I haven't checked it out yet, but I feel like I'd get a lot out of it. So like, just to clarify the gimmick, like, is it that they're pretending actively that Harry Potter is a sacred text, or is it more like they're using the tools and mentality that you would use when approaching a sacred text to think about it?
The latter.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not like sitting here being like, "Oh, great God, J.K. Rowling, teach me." No, it is very much they use. In fact, they use some old techniques to analyze scripture in analyzing. I forget what one of the techniques is. It's just this like way of breaking down a sentence in scripture to the four different levels are: what is the text literally saying? What is it metaphorically saying? How does this relate to me in my life? And how am I going to change myself based on that? And so like in some episodes, they just pick literally a random line from within the chapter they're covering in that, and then they go through that process with that random line. And that is something that I think Catholic scholars have done with the Bible for hundreds of years. And they're just saying, let's try to do that with this book. And it's really fascinating.
I think that is really fascinating because, like, in my opinion, what you're really doing when you do something like that is you're using essentially like random content, semi-random content to like stimulate your own moral reflection, or spiritual reflection, or however you choose to think of it.
Yeah,
and that's fine, like, because I actually encourage that anyway. Yeah, I think I will check this out. I don't know why, but for some reason that last thing you said really appeals to me.
Yeah, and the other thing I like about it is I say fairly low time investment. I think they're on book 6, so it's like 6 entire books, and they do an episode on each chapter. And of course, the Harry Potter books get considerably longer, but it's 30-minute episodes, so it's like I found it very easy to just pop in, listen to an episode, and I was not reading along with it, and I don't think it's necessary to read along with it. They do this funny thing where they try to explain everything that happened in the chapter in 30 seconds, and that's pretty fun because they compete. Like, one of them goes first, and then the other one tries, and then they have the listeners vote on who did a better job, and that's just inherently entertaining on its own. But I don't know. It's something that, like, I have no rush to finish, but like if I've finished out my weekly shows that are coming out, and I have some extra time, I will go back to the backlog and just start listening, and I've been enjoying it.
Excellent.
All right, what do you got from me, Matt? Give me one of yours, and we'll go back and forth.
Sure. I want to make a meta comment before I say one of mine, though, which is that I've made a real effort in 2019 to like reduce hate reading and hate listening. So I've basically stopped listening to what you might call like any kind of political podcast because they just make me mad. And I can do without that. So I've cut I've been muting a ton of people on Twitter. I've been cutting out a lot of podcasts from my rotation, and I'm just a lot happier, and my mind is more focused on positive things that I want to accomplish. And I actually really recommend it as like just a very kind of it's a very easy decision to make, because it's like, well obviously there's no reason to waste your time being angry. So just like once you realize how much time you waste being angry and annoyed at things that you are doing to yourself that you don't have to be listening to, then it's a pretty easy choice to not do that anymore. So that's my meta comment.
I like that. That's great. You just made me delete 2 podcasts from my list as you were talking.
Excellent. So I think that I've been listening intermittently to a bunch of new podcasts since I last talked about them, and I think I might go through a few quickly. Like one I've been listening to for a while is the Beysian Conspiracy podcast. I listen to every episode, and you know, the people who do that podcast are my friends. And
we've had one of them on the show before.
And like they're literally talking about exactly the kinds of things that I would want to talk to them about in person. So that's that's like super fun and keyed into my brain. But like it's basically a rationality community podcast, and that's one where like I actually recommend if that people like check it out, just like go and like scroll through their episode history and just like find something that sounds interesting to you, because they have really good conversations. But it may be that like any given episode may not be talking about something that you're necessarily going to care about or understand if you're not already kind of in that community. But I think I think that like, I don't know, I think the kind of people who listen to our show like to think about things, and they might actually get some enjoyment out of Beysian Conspiracy. Yeah,
I do not listen to every single episode of that, but I think I started with the ones that you're on. I'm like, I gotta keep tabs on Matt. He's on this podcast. Let's see what he's talking about. But I'm subscribed to them, so when I see a topic pop up in my feed that I think looks interesting, I'll listen to it. And yeah, I mean, I do not have a lot of information and knowledge of the rational community, so this is not something I know a lot about. But I certainly have enjoyed the conversations that they've had on certain things. I can't remember the one thing that like got me thinking about something, and I was talking back and forth with you about it for like 2 days. I don't remember exactly what it was, but
yeah, that was fun. I'm glad that happened. I don't remember what the topic was either, but I was like, oh, good. Scott's been nerd sniped. This is great.
Great.
Yeah, that's one of mine. Yeah, well, tell me one of yours.
This one's for you, Matt. There's a podcast I used to listen to a podcast called Storm of Spoilers, and it was a Game of Thrones podcast that basically went through the Game of Thrones episodes, and they did a cool thing where they would have a section of the show where they would talk all about the spoilers. So anything that they was leaks or rumors or production pictures that made them think they knew something was going to happen in the show, they would talk about that in one section of the podcast. And I didn't always listen to those until after the show came out, because I would go back and forth on whether I cared enough about the show to spoiler myself. Point is, Game of Thrones is over, so I was like, okay, cool, this is another podcast I get to take off my feed and not have and free up some time to listen to some other stuff. But then the creators of this podcast said, no, we're going to do something else. So they've switched now to a podcast called Just the Storm, and it is a Lost rewatch podcast. They are going episode by episode through Lost and talking about it. And the cool thing is they're breaking it down just like they did with Game of Thrones, where they have the first part of the episode is just to talk about just that episode and everything that has happened up to that episode, and then they move into a section where they talk about the episode in context of the whole show, or what they remember of the whole show. And I think that's inherently a cool way to break down the show and talk about it. So you bring on people that have never watched Lost before that are watching the first time, but also you can bring in like people that really like it, or people like me that just kind of don't know how we feel about it and want to revisit it. And you would think, Matt, that this would make me not want to do the Lost podcast I've been trying to get you to do. But actually what it's doing is it's making me want to do that more, because there's like stuff they say that I'm like, I think I have a different take on that, or why didn't you, or I wish you had talked about this, or it's just like more things that I want to say about Lost because I'm listening to this Lost podcast. So sorry, Matt. Sorry.
I think that's why podcasters are people who listen to podcasts, because we're like,
I think that's true.
I think I could have done a better job on that.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I probably will check that out, because like I feel frequently like I'm being unfair to Lost, because I think there's a problem with my brain where if I don't like the way something ends, I decide the whole thing was terrible. Which I don't like this about myself, because I'm like, no, Matt, you loved many episodes of Lost. I know this. And then the bigger part of me is like, shut up. That's not true.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the cool things that they're doing, and one of the things that I want to do with you when we do that eventual show, that is definitely happening 100%. Lost is the show that sits in this very weird place in time, because it is a show right before television changed, to the point where the expectation is now that when you start a TV show, you have a plan for what your story is going to be.
Yeah.
And Lost is a show that really existed before that happened, but it's a show that like made itself seem like that was true when it wasn't. Like the idea that Lost had a plan is just objectively false. They were doing the same thing that TV had been doing forever. up until the last decade or so, whereas they were just had a concept, they had a plot concept, and they were rolling off of that plot concept throughout the show, and that's just what they were doing, and that's just like objectively what they were doing, but like they kind of made it seem like they weren't, and that's their fault. And so looking at the show in a lens of what it actually is versus what the producers and creators and writers made it seem like through the media and through the advertising and through the online conversations is a fascinating thing to look at. And I'm looking forward to them getting to it, and of course us getting to it eventually.
Okay.
Also, the first season of Lost is like legitimately one of the best television shows ever. Like the first season, and I think they're on episode 5 or something. So they're like right in the meat of the beginning of the show. Like I still think the pilot is one of the most spectacularly shot and directed and written things ever. The pilot of Lost is incredible, and so it's fun to go back to where the show was like really, really just killing it.
Yeah.
And listening to people talk about it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, later on, I think it's not. Yeah, I don't like the way it ends, but also I think it gets boring, and being boring is worse than being bad. Okay,
That's fair.
I'll check it out. I'll listen to a couple episodes.
All right.
My next one, I don't think I've mentioned this before, but it's a podcast called Conversations with Tyler, and it's by Tyler Cowen, who's I guess he's an economist at a university, like a professor, and like he has first of all, he has a lot of really good guests that pretty much like almost anyone would be interested in some of his guests. So like you might just want to go to the podcast, scroll down, just in terms of entertainment, he's got Margaret Atwood is a recent guest.
I went to a website immediately and saw that and was like, oh my God, I need to listen to that episode. And I love Margaret Atwood.
But he's got a really, really, really wide range of guests too. Like I see there's like Eric Schmidt is on here. Obviously there's a lot of like economists and like people who've written books. The guy who made like Ethereum is on here. So like that's the thing is that's one cool thing about interview podcasts is you can always just scroll through and find someone who you want to hear a conversation with. And then if you like the interviewer style, then you'll check out more. And I happen to really like Tyler Cowen's interview style because, he has this interesting thing where, yes, he'll have conversations with the guests, but it's actually mostly him like in a very reserved fashion, asking them a question and then letting them talk. And then when they seem to be done talking, he'll just move on to the next question, which almost like when I describe it that way, it almost sounds bad because it's like, oh, you're not drawing the answers out of the guest, but it creates this interesting effect where the guest is very rapidly like trained to understand that he's not going to like be dragging more words out of them. And if they want to say more, then they're just going to have to say more. And so it interestingly is a kind of judo move that gets them to like say longer statements than maybe they otherwise would. And I just happen to like it and find that it works better than you might think. I like the style quite a bit.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds interesting. I had never heard of that, so I might check out one or two of those.
Cool.
This was a good idea to do, but now I'm just loading up my freaking podcatcher again with
I know
more stuff.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so the last one I wanted to talk about today is a podcast called Unspooled. This is a movie podcast. I had to get at least one of those in. And the basic concept of this podcast is to take the AFI Top 100 Greatest Movies of All Time and just talk about them. So it is hosted by Amy Nicholson, who is a film critic that I really like, and Paul Scheer, who's a comedian who also hosts the How Did This Get Made podcast. And I think he does some other shows too. He does a lot. But these two host it, and they're basically going through the AFI list movie by movie. They talk about it because it's a pretty big, well-supported show. They get really fascinating interviews by either people who worked on the movie, or if it's like a really old movie, like historians, or like I think they just did Vertigo, and they had like an Alfred Hitchcock expert that they talked to for 30 minutes, but just about Hitchcock and about Vertigo and what Hitch thought of Vertigo and all that stuff. It's really really interesting because part of what they're trying to do is like ask the question, does this really deserve to be one of the 100 greatest movies of all time? Why do we think it was put on the list? What do we think about it? What do we think about it? Like that AFI list is, it came out in 97. They updated it in 2007. So it's already over a decade old now. And so should these movies fall off to make room for other things? And I just like, I think they're both very intelligent people. Amy's got the like super in-depth film knowledge, and Paul is a comedian. So he's just very well spoken and very entertaining. And it's just a great combination. And I've enjoyed every single episode. I think they just hit the halfway point. So they've done 50 movies. They got 50 to go.
Cool. I just looked at that, and it's another fun type of podcast where you can just scroll through and look for stuff, and like, oh, they're talking about Silence of the Lambs. I want to hear what they have to say about that.
Yeah, I'm mad because I had that same idea, but obviously I'm not Paul Scheer, so mine probably wouldn't be as good.
Not yet.
But yeah, I'm not Paul Scheer yet.
Right.
I'm on my way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess like the next podcast I wanted to talk about is the Media MD. Which, because like, I did go back and listen to a ton of their backlog, when they kind of joined the Doof network, and I really enjoyed their back and forth and the types of things they have to say about the movies they've watched, and I like the structure of it too, where it's like recommending things to each other.
Yeah.
I find that actually a really good framework for having a discussion, and instead of just being like, I guess let's talk about this thing. It's like, it's always something that one of them likes a lot, and that the other one hasn't seen, and that just makes for like a naturally more interesting kind of conversation, I think. I
agree. It's a really good gimmick. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
I like these guys for sure. I mean, there's a reason we brought them on board, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of our listeners here might listen to Deep Impact and might not know about Media MD. That's the other podcast that they do. I think they do it every 2 weeks or every fortnight, as they would say, because they're wacky Australians.
Yeah.
I don't understand why we don't use the word fortnight. It's a great word. Why don't we use it?
Yeah,
it's a way better than saying once every 2 weeks.
Right, and that reminds me, like when somebody did a poll on what does bi-weekly mean, and it was exactly split between twice a week and every 2 weeks. It's like, yeah, we need different words. We just need entirely different words.
The word is there. Just use fortnight, America.
Yeah, that's those are, I think, the top podcasts that I've been listening to recently that I might not have mentioned before. The only other ones that I might just offhandedly mention would be Rationally Speaking, which is like a bigger, more mainstream rational community podcast. And the host Julia Galef is really good. And she tends to have pretty high caliber guests, actually. So that's another one where I recommend just like skimming through the guest list, or skimming through the podcast list and maybe picking out one or two that sound like a guest that you'd want to hear from. Mm-hmm. I've been listening to the Jocko Willink's Warrior Kid podcast with my kids. I think I mentioned this before, but that's
I know you've mentioned Jocko before. I don't know if you've mentioned this one.
So Jocko has the Jocko podcast, which is basically him being a hard ass and talking about like massacres and stuff, which I don't listen to that often anymore because I'm like, I don't need to feel really depressed on my morning commute. But the Warrior Kid podcast, I listen to that with my kids, and he has this cool framework where it's like he'll answer questions that are like tweeted at him from kids, or presumably from their parents, tweeting their kids questions at him, and he'll give like, I don't know, he's very like wise person, so he'll just have really thoughtful answers, and so I'll listen to it with my kids and hope that maybe some of his like perspective on the world rubs off on them. So
that's pretty cool.
Podcasts weren't a thing when I was a kid, obviously. So this is kind of me trying to be like, all right, well, this is a new world, and maybe my kids will look back on this as something really cool that matters to them. Hopefully.
You know what I'm kind of done with? True crime podcasts. Uh-huh. I know it's like huge. Like there's so many out there, and they're actually really popular. And I think I read Apple sent us an email the other day that said they're going to increase their what their categories are on Apple Podcasts, which we need to look into that because we might have to switch some of our categories over for some of these things. I always hated that like literature was just an arts, which is like a huge category that filled a lot of different kind of things.
Right.
And so I think that's changing around. But I just don't care about true crime anymore. I'm just kind of done with it. Like I was huge into Serial. I watched the Netflix documentary, like The Making a Murderer and stuff, and was like really into that stuff. And I'm just kind of tired of it now. I'm just like, it just feels, I think with you, like your hate watching thing is my true crime thing, where I'm just like, this just makes me feel shitty about the world. And like either it's how shitty people are or how shitty our justice system is, and either way, it just makes you feel shitty, and I just don't want that anymore.
Yeah, I've personally just found, like, empirically by observing my own behavior, that I just don't really listen to any like well-produced podcasts, and by that I mean like ones like Serial, where it just like obviously takes like a ton of time. Like I'm like that's like an audiobook to me. Like that's not a, I mean, even what like Hardcore History, I listen to Hardcore History when it comes out, but to me Hardcore History is not a podcast, it's an audiobook.
Sure.
And like I actually like the fact that you can just like rattle off a podcast in an hour and a half, and it feels more like a conversation between humans. Like my brain likes to process information that way.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's something you and I have tried to do, you know, speaking about podcasts generally. Like I could spend 3 hours editing this conversation right here and like take out all the and like all the awkward pauses as we try to think of things and like really tighten it up. But that wouldn't really be a conversation anymore.
Yeah.
It would be something else. And I do think there is an inherent value in the kind of conversational method that podcasts can do. So yeah, I mean, it's not just that I'm lazy and don't want to take the time. It's that I value that. I value that in the shows I listen to, and I value that in the shows I produce. So yeah, I'm with you on that one.
I mean, I feel like I can listen to like a lecturer speak for like 20 minutes at most before my mind wanders, but I can listen to like a 3-hour podcast with minimal mind wandering. It's like there's something about like natural human conversations that it's organic. It's two people who are actually trying to engage with each other, who are trying to anticipate each other's thoughts, and it engages your mind in a way that is not the case when it's like a show, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, there's even times where I've thought about taking out like just some of the tics we do, but like I do think it's like when you talk to someone for a long time, as we have, you do start to kind of anticipate them in certain ways. Like I can tell when you're wrapping up your point. You can tell when I'm wrapping up my point, and we kind of feel each other out as far as like when is appropriate for the other person to jump in or start on their thing or piggyback off their point. And I think when you start like slicing up the audio and messing with that, the rhythm of that gets lost, and it makes the conversation feel more stilted, actually.
I agree. I mean, not to be too weird and meta, but like I'm technically interrupting you when I'm saying like right a bunch of times while you're talking. But that's what people do. People do that in real life.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's fine. It's not like if you cut that out, I feel like it would take something away, personally.
Yeah, I mean, especially when it's an audio only thing, right? Like if we were sitting in front of each other in a room talking, I might not interrupt with rights. I probably still would, but I would definitely be nodding. Like I would definitely be reacting to what you're saying in a certain way. And because I can't do that as we're talking right now, yeah, I mean, it feels nice when I'm giving a point and I hear you say right. So I'm like, okay, he's with me on this. He understands. I don't have to rephrase how I'm doing this. Like, I think that's important to the conversation for sure.
Yeah. A lot of, I don't know. It's a cool thing to think about, that just this idea that like, it's actually a higher bandwidth way of communicating, because we're communicating things that aren't just the words. It's subtext. It's the way things are said, you know? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Absolutely. All right. So those are podcasts. Yay. What are you guys listening to? Let us know.
Yeah.
All right, Matt, it's time for the promised most important segment of the week. It's time where I convince you that you should be watching the Marblelympics. To do that, I have to first explain what the Marblelympics is.
Please do.
So Jelly's Marble Runs is a YouTube channel that basically does marble racing. So they like dig out really long trenches and they just roll marbles, and the first one across the finish line wins. And they do other kind of like a bunch of different kind of marble races. And then at one point, I'm not sure exactly when this happened, I think it was like 2016 maybe, they said we're going to do like an Olympics but with marbles. And so it's 16 events, and there are, I forget how many, there's tryouts for the marbles, and then a certain number of marbles get in. And like the production quality on this thing is amazing. Like the thing that makes this work is I think the guy that does the voiceovers for the races is like a professional NASCAR announcer. So he's like really good at announcing races, like really good at it. And he treats it with utmost sincerity. And that's the thing that I think works about this concept in general, is that it's hilarious because they're marbles and it is absolutely 100% nothing but chance. However, I think this is a very interesting examination of how human psychology works, because like even in just a one-off race that is not part of an overall Olympic event, is just like, I'm rolling 20 marbles down the thing. Like human beings will go, well, I want the red one to win.
Right.
and then suddenly you're invested. Like it, just like that, like it happens that fast. It's like you think in your head, I want this marble to win, and then you're all in. Like you're cheering on the marble. You're like, especially when an announcer is like saying who's jockeying for first place and who's gotten pushed back and which marble just got stuck on the side of the hill. And it's just it's so fascinating to see how quickly people buy into this. And of course, it's something that we've known as true forever, because like that's why sports are a thing, right? Like you pick your sports team and you're incredibly invested in your sports team and you have no control over this outcome. And yes, there is less chance in sports than there is in marbles rolling down a hill, but it's the same kind of psychological thing going on in your head. And the genius of the Marblelympics is they treat it like as if it's real. Like they are fully 100% committed. 2 years ago in one of the events, a marble got chipped and they treated it like it was a person that just got injured during competition, and like the rest of the team had to like go to another team who got eliminated and join forces to put a full team roster. This year the host nation, the Oceanics, is not doing good, and they fired their coach midway through one of the events. Which is, it's nonsense. Like they're marbles, but they fired their coach, and like, because they like the marbles were just sick of doing bad. So the coach gets fired. And then the next thing he's like, the Oceanics are back with their new coach and let's see how they do in this race. And it's insane in the best way. Like I find it very hard to believe that there's a human being out there that like after watching one race is not like 100% invested in this thing.
I mean, it sounds genius. It sounds like my favorite kind of humor, where it's just completely played straight, taking the joke far beyond what is reasonable.
Yeah, and like my team is the Savage Speeders. I don't remember why my team is the Savage Speeders. I just one day said, yeah, that one. And like I get pissed off when my team loses. And it's just like my team started out the gate in this Marblelympics with 2 gold medals in a row, and they've done jack shit since, and is the most frustrating thing in the world. But they're marbles. Like it's not like my team's letting me down. It's just like the coin flip that is rolling marbles down a hill is not going in my way. But
literally random. But
it doesn't matter. Like it doesn't matter. And I mean, this is the same. Like this is a truism of human beings. Like this is why esports is popular. This is why regular sports is possible. This is why this is possible. The second your mind has the ability to create these artificial stakes easily, and once it does it, you're in. And I think there's nothing better to exemplify this than the Marblelympics.
Yeah, I'm enjoying the wiki. I'm looking at it right now. Looking at Team Momo.
Oh yeah, that's Team Momo. You have the O Rangers, who are they're basically like the New England Patriots of the Marblelympics, and so everyone hates them because they're obnoxious because they always win, and they like. Each team has like a distinct cheer because they do like background cheering noises. So every time the Rangers are doing something, it goes, oh, and you're just like, shut up. Oh, I hate the fucking Rangers so much. I can't like, it's everything I'm saying sounds insane. Like it, and I fully acknowledge that, but trust me. Everyone trust me. I showed it to Elise. She loved it. I said, Elise, bring this to your 5th grade class. Those kids will lose their shit over this. And that is exactly what happened. Her 5th graders love it. Like,
That's brilliant.
There were people that would walk up to her and be like, can we watch more of the Marble movies? It's so good.
I bet my kids would like this, but I'm kind of worried about its effects as like a mind virus because, like, to be honest, like the reason I haven't checked it out yet is I'm like, oh yeah, that'll ruin me. That'll completely derail my brain, and I'll care about this new thing that makes no sense and brings no actual value other than like the fabricated. I mean, whatever. I guess fiction is already fabricated.
Yeah.
Everything is fake, Scott.
Yeah.
I'm having an existential crisis because you're going to make me watch Marblelympics.
This is actually why I don't watch wrestling. Because like I
Yeah.
know for a fact wrestling would work on me in this exact same way, and I just don't have fucking time to get into wrestling.
Yeah,
like at
right.
least the Marblelympics is like it's one event a year. They do like 2 videos a week, and they're like 10 minutes long. So like that's pretty low time commitment to this thing. Yeah.
Okay, well that's good to know.
Yeah. All right, that. Now that I've convinced you all to spend your entire weekend watching all the past Marblelympics episodes, that is all we had for you guys this week. If you have opinions on Meet the Feebles, on podcasts in general, on Jelly's Marble Runs, please reach out to us via email at doofmedia@gmail.com or over on our Twitter account at doofmedia.
Yeah, and if you're not already subscribed to this podcast, we encourage you to do so and ensure you never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else podcasts can be found.
And you can find this and all of our other shows at our website, doofmedia.com. That's also where you can find Deep Impact, the show by our friends over at Media MD. And you can find their show. Is their website just mediamd.com?
I think so.
Let me look that up real quick. You can find the other show that Matt was talking about today at... No, it's not it. Media MD. Quick, Google, quick. MediaMDpodcast.com is where you can find their show that they do every other week. They just did a podcast on David Tennant Does a Podcast. So like us, they were getting very meta.
That's funny. Yeah, cool.
And Patreon, we got to do that. If you want to support what we do here, you can become a patron of Doof Media. You can head on over to patreon.com/Doof Media, pledge $1 a month or whatever else you can afford, and it helps us grow. It helps us make new shows. It helps me convince Matt to do that Lost show, which is definitely going to happen. This episode here, us talking about Meet the Feebles, only exists because of our patron Connor, because he was just generous enough to donate to us at that Doof Warrior level. Connor, we hope you enjoyed the episode. Thank you very much for making us watch Meet the Feebles. I'm glad I watched this without my wife, because I would have gotten some interesting
looks.
Judgments from her.
Yeah, me too. I love this. I'm really glad that I have now seen this very strange and unique little thing.
Yep.
And please consider rating and reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts. Every review helps us get more exposure and introduces new people to the content that we make here.
All right, guys, we will be back next week with another episode talking all about... This is as I'm waiting for my calendar to load. It is another Deconstructing Shyamalan episode. We are going to be talking about The Village.
Awesome.
See you next week.
My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say. My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say.